This is every NBA Western Conference team's best chances this season. I'll be using ESPN Bet's over-under margins for each team this season. Then I'll be picking either over or under and explaining why for every team in the Western Conference. Starting off with the Oklahoma City Thunder. ESPN Bet has them placed to win 63 games this regular season. And even though that's a mammoth number, I'm going to be taking the over. There's a stat that I'll be referring to quite a bit, the expected wins number from Cleaning the Glass, which estimates how many games a team should have won last season based on their point differential. Last season, Oklahoma City won 68 games, but their expected win total was actually at 69 games. So yes, even as the best team in the league, they technically underperformed. That alone makes me want to take the over. But honestly, that's not even the biggest reason why I'm over on the Thunder. They battled injury all last season. Chet Holmgren missed 50 games with a fractured hip, and they didn't have their full playoff starting five until after All-Star break, and they still won 68. This season, they should have better health, and if they do, the team's ceiling gets even higher. SGA just continues to get better every single year, and I think this could be the season where we see the real playmaking leap out of him, finally patching up one of their biggest weaknesses, half-court offense. Their collective three-point shooting often let them down last season, but I'm also feeling more confident now thanks to expected leaps out of Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams. Chet Holmgren was phenomenal defensively last postseason, but that hip injury really hurt his rhythm on the other end. But now, with an off-season to regain that mobility, he should be smoother, lighter on his feet, more confident pulling up off the dribble, and attacking the lane off the bounce as well. If he can give them near 20 points per game on close to 40% shooting from three, while still being a threat in the paint, he could be one of the best two-way players in the league next season. I also would like to see more pick and rolls ran with he and SGA, building out the chemistry even further to make that their go-to action in the half court. And then there's the leap I'm expecting from Jalen Williams, one of my favorite players in the NBA right now, because he can virtually do it all. Shoot, defend 1 through 5, handle the ball like a guard, and the best part about all of it is how he's still years from his prime. He played all the way through the playoffs with a torn ligament in his shooting hand, and yet he still managed to drop 40 in Game 5 of the NBA Finals. Once he's healthy, I truly think he could be a top 20 player in the NBA this season. So now they're improving their only real weakness, while maintaining what might be the best defense we have ever seen. Last season, they ranked first in defensive rating, holding opponents to just 107.5 points per game. And they were the league's #1 team at turning defense into offense, forcing turnovers on 18.3% of their defensive possessions, which is nearly 1 in every 5 trips down the floor. That's absurd. There's basically no weak link. The entire team can guard at a really good level, and their switching and rotating is absolutely perfect. They hunt turnovers like piranhas to meat in water, and once they get one, they're able to continue to stack these incredible defensive possessions, and the pressure just continues to mount on the opposition. So, with the NBA's best defense and a steadily improving offense, I'm absolutely taking Oklahoma City to win over 63 games this regular season. Now, let's take a look at the Golden State Warriors. ESPN Bet has their over-under set at 47 wins. The first thing that comes to mind when deciding the over or under is one man, Jimmy Butler. I think people have kind of forgotten just how much the Warriors were struggling before they traded for him. We all remember how dominant they all looked after Jimmy had arrived. But before that, they didn't even look like a competent basketball team. Now you've got Butler for a full season, and I just don't see them going through as rough of a patch as the middle of last season was this year. And keep in mind, even with that mid-season slump, last year's Warriors still finished with 48 wins. Looking at cleaning the glasses expected wins metric, Golden State was exactly in the middle, as their +3 net rating lined up perfectly with their 48 win total. But when you zoom in on that starting five after adding Jimmy Butler, that group had a +17.9 net rating, which is absolutely incredible. Easily good enough to earn you home court playoffs. Now, I don't think they'll quite reach that mark again, as I'll probably slot them somewhere between the 4 and 7 seed just because of the health and age of the roster. But once the playoffs roll around and they get a spot, they're going to be a real threat. The interesting thing about this team is that both Butler and Curry are guys that don't exactly go all out in the regular season anymore, keeping themselves healthy and focused on peaking when it absolutely matters the most. So while Golden State probably won't attack the regular season as hard as some of the other younger teams, I still think they're going to be a really hard out in the playoffs. So, because of just how good Golden State looked once they had Jimmy Butler and how seamless of a fit it truly was, I'm actually going to take the over on Golden State. Not by a ton, but probably enough to land them in that 49 to 51 win range. Now, let's move on to the Memphis Grizzlies. And ESPN Bet has their over-under set at 41 wins. This is one of the tougher calls in the West, and honestly, I'm not feeling super confident about my decision. I just have a feeling that some way, somehow, Memphis will be around 500, probably finishing with about 43 to 44 wins, so I am reluctantly taking the over. Injuries are already an issue, which basically has been the story for the past couple of seasons for Memphis. The early stretch is going to be especially rough, with Jaren Jackson Jr., Zach Edey, and Brandon Clark all expected to miss some time. That leaves them with pretty much no big man depth to begin the year. Jock Landale is set to start at the 5, and while he can be serviceable by setting screens, rebounding and doing the dirty work, expecting him to be any more than that is pretty unrealistic. If those guys can get back relatively soon, there's definitely enough young talent here. Around Ja Morant and Triple J, you've got several rotation players who can impact winning. But for Memphis to actually be solid this year, they are going to need real leaps from their young guys. Gigi Jackson, Vince Williams, and maybe even Ty Jerome, who they added from Cleveland. I think the Grizzlies will end up being a pretty middle-of-the-pack team on both sides of the ball. With the injuries piling up, they're not going to blow anybody away early, but I just can't see them falling apart either. Memphis always manage to be competitive, and when they're playing in their home building, they just have the chip on their shoulder type swagger that keeps them competitive throughout a regular season. So I'm barely going to be taking the over this season, even if it's by a single win. I just think Memphis finds a way to be at least 500 this season. Now, let's take a look at the Dallas Mavericks. And ESPN Bet has their over-under set at 41 wins. And for this one, I'm not letting the anticipation build. This is way too low of a number. I'll be taking the over. Sure, Kyrie Irving probably won't be back until later on in the season, but even then, there's no guarantee that he's going to look like his old self coming off that ACL injury. But what we have seen from Cooper Flagg in the preseason has been pretty impossible to ignore. He's already doing everything the Mavericks desperately need him to do. Handling the ball, making smart reads, knocking down shots, and defending at a high level. And the craziest part about all of this is how he's doing it at a level nobody expected him to reach this soon. It almost feels like people haven't been talking about how good Flagg actually is. Probably because we just witnessed Victor Wembanyama enter the league and dominate, kind of stealing the spotlight a little bit. But make no mistake, Cooper isn't that far off. He's got the same level of talent and definitely competitiveness. The dude is just wired differently. During the Summer League, his first game was one where he was definitely impactful, but he didn't shoot the ball too well. But in his second game, he was able to follow it up with an effective 31-point game. And the crazy part about this is how Cooper begged the Mavericks coaching staff to let him play another game just to show the world that it wasn't a fluke. And of course, the coaching staff had to stop him, but that's just the kind of mentality he has. And if he was that locked in to a summer league game, what's he going to do for the Mavericks in the regular season? Because of that, my doubts about just how impactful Cooper Flagg could be as a rookie are fading fast. He already looks ready. If he can continue to be that steady two-way presence by the time Kyrie returns, then Dallas's offense suddenly looks a whole lot more dangerous. And defensively, well, that's not going to be a problem for them this season because they're going to be elite. They're leaning in heavily to size and versatility with Anthony Davis manning the 4 and guys like Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively behind him protecting the rim. This setup allows AD to be way more aggressive defensively, knowing that there's always going to be a guy having his back behind him. And when you throw Cooper Flagg into that mix too, a guy who can truly impact on both ends already, this team has serious balance. Of course, so much of this depends on Anthony Davis staying healthy. He's going to be their defensive anchor, and also one of their primary scorers. So if he goes down, everything changes. But if Anthony Davis can stay on the floor, and Kyrie Irving makes his return around February, giving him enough time to round back into form, then I think Dallas could actually push for 50. But realistically, I've got them finishing somewhere around the 44 to 47 win mark. So for me, this is absolutely a lock. Dallas will go over 41 wins this regular season. Now, let's take a look at the Los Angeles Lakers. And ESPN Bet has their over-under set at 49 wins. One fewer than what they finished with in last regular season. But when we look deeper into the numbers, there's far more to it. According to Cleaning the Glass, the Lakers were actually the team that overperformed the most last season. Their net rating was just plus 1.5, which would typically give you 45 wins, not 50. So in reality, they outperformed their expected record by 5 games. And usually, when a team does that, they tend to come back down to earth the following year. However, the Lakers did add a pretty important piece midway through last season. Someone you may have heard of, Luka Doncic. That move alone completely changes their ceiling. The question is, does it raise it enough to make up for those 5 games and actually sustain that success in a loaded Western Conference? I'm not entirely sure. The biggest concern for their season is on the defensive end. Their core trio of Luka Doncic, LeBron James, and Austin Reeves gives them a ton of offensive firepower, but all 3 players opposing teams are going to want to hunt in mismatches. Outside of Marcus Smart and Jared Vanderbilt, they really don't have many true impactful defensive players. And even those two come with their own limitations. That being said though, when Luka Doncic was on the floor last season, the Lakers looked fantastic. They outscored teams by 9.8 points per 100. Which was in the 90th percentile league-wide. And that wasn't some tiny sample size either. That was around 2,000 possessions. So the data says when Luka's out there, this team performs at an incredibly high level. So if you're thinking about taking the over on the Lakers, it's basically a Luka bet. LeBron was still great in year 22, but at this stage of his career, he's just not the guy who can single-handedly carry a team anymore. Especially given the recent injury update around him. This season is going to be about Luka. He appears to be a man on a mission, the best shape of his career, laser focused and ready to go on a revenge tour after the criticism he faced. I honestly think this should be the best season of his career, which says a lot considering he had a year where he nearly averaged a 30-point triple-double, but I believe he'll be right back there again. But even with that, the real question for me is what can everybody else provide? Outside of Luka and LeBron, when he's going to be available, I just don't trust the supporting cast enough to reach 49 wins. The defense is a glaring issue, and that's ultimately going to hold them back. So I'll be taking the under on the Lakers this season, probably finishing around about 46 wins. Now let's move on to the Minnesota Timberwolves. and ESPN Bet has their over-under set at 50 wins. The betting markets have them ranked as only the 9th most likely team to win the title, sitting behind the Orlando Magic at 8, which just feels crazy to me. I think Minnesota is a whole lot better than that suggests. So I'm clearly going with the over for the Wolves. But let's at least break down why the betting odds don't really trust them. Part of it for sure comes down to the idea that Minnesota benefited heavily from good health last season, as they were one of the more healthier teams in the league. They also lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and their young guys are going to have to step up and fill that role. And with Terrence Shannon Jr. to be the likely candidate, he doesn't project to be as strong as a replacement to truly give you what Alexander-Walker provided. Those are valid criticisms for sure, but I just think people are overlooking the bigger picture here. When you go back and look at Cleaning the Glass's expected win stat, the Wolves were actually one of the biggest underperformers in the entire league last season. Based on their net rating, Cleaning the Glass thinks they should have won 54 games, but they only managed 49. That means by just tightening up their late game execution, which was a real issue for them early in the year, they could easily win 5 more games without changing much at all. And that's before you even account for the fact that the team actually got significantly better as the season went on last year. They started out the season slow, but really, and I mean really, found their stride in the back half, carrying all of that momentum back to the conference finals. A big part of that turnaround was certainly Julius Randle, as he got more and more comfortable within that system and really found a role as a playmaker in the team. He gave them a guy who could get downhill, draw help, and then consistently find shooters out on the perimeter, something they had been missing. Now that he's had a full off season to properly gel with the team, I think they should be off to a pretty good start, and they won't have to be making up all the ground that they had to fight for last season, putting them in much better stead. Then you look at Anthony Edwards, who's at the point of his career where every single off-season he's making another big leap in his game. Last year it was the three-point shot. It went from a weakness to a legitimate strength, becoming basically one of the best in the league from that range. This off-season, he's been focused on adding a mid-range game, which would truly make him a 3-level scorer and completely change how teams have to defend him. If that happens, Minnesota's offense, which has historically been a weak spot, would suddenly become a strength. And the foundation of their defense is still elite. Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels anchor one of the most disciplined and versatile defensive systems in the game. And the good news is, that isn't going anywhere. So unless Minnesota gets hit with more injuries this season, which to be fair is a risk for every team, I see no reason as to why this team can't blow past 49 wins. Now, let's move on to the Portland Trail Blazers, who ESPN Bet has their win total set at 34 wins. This was a team that I was pretty high on earlier in the offseason when I was doing my first round of predictions. They finished last season really strong, going 23-18 down the stretch, while leaning into a new defensive identity and finding a real gem in Denny Abdia. At the time, they were playing some of the best defense in the league, and Abdia was giving them enough offensively to win games. But the Drew Holiday addition in place of Anthony Simons changes a lot, and not necessarily for the better. I think that swap is going to hurt them more than people realize. Holiday didn't look like the same guy towards the back half of last season. That second round series against the Knicks was pretty ugly for him, as he wasn't able to stay in front of anybody defensively, and the shot wasn't falling either. And with Simons gone, Portland now lost their true late game shot maker, the guy who would create something out of nothing when possessions broke down. That's a big deal, because this team is going to find themselves in a ton of close games. They're not good enough to blow teams out. So to win a game, they're going to have to win it in the clutch. And when you're in that situation, you need a closer, and I just don't think they've got one. And then there's the Scoot Henderson injury, which is another massive setback. He tore his hamstring and is expected to be out for at least 1 to 2 months, possibly longer, which means he's going to miss a massive chunk of the season. And with an injury like that, you're not necessarily the same when you come back right away anyway. Henderson was supposed to be the full-time starting point guard this year, and Portland was clearly building their entire offensive structure around his development. Losing him for that long not only stunts his growth, but it also takes away their most dynamic on-ball creator, along with losing their other in the trade for Drew Holiday. In a Western Conference where every single win is going to be really hard to come by, missing your cornerstone for that long can completely derail a season. Between the loss of Simons, the uncertainty of Drew Holiday, and Scoot Henderson's injury, I just don't see how this team is going to keep pace. So yeah, even though I was high on the Blazers to end off last season, too much has changed since then. And even though they added Damian Lillard, he isn't going to be coming back. And for all of those reasons, I'm taking the under on the Portland Trail Blazers this season. Now, let's move on to the Utah Jazz, whose over-under total is set at just 19 wins. When you see a number that low, it feels almost wrong to take the under. Like, surely any team can stumble their way to 20 wins in an 82-game season. But actually, that's not always the case. And honestly, I think Utah might actually go under. When you look at their roster, it's hard to figure out exactly where the consistent production is going to come from. They've got veterans like Kevin Love and Yusuf Nurkic legitimately in the rotation, who at this stage of their careers are just not needle movers anymore. In fact, they're quite the opposite. And while Ace Bailey looks like a really promising young talent, rookies almost never have a major impact on winning in year one, especially on teams this thin. So even though 19 games feels like a low bar, I actually think the under is going to be the right call here. Now let's move on to the San Antonio Spurs, whose over-under win total is set at 45 wins. And honestly, this might have been the toughest call out of all of them. On one hand, you've got Victor Wembanyama, who was already amazing last season and somehow looks even better coming into this one. Despite the fact he went down halfway through last season with the blood clot issue, the Spurs still managed to pull out 34 wins, which is really impressive for a young team. In a hypothetical world where Wemby stays healthy, I genuinely think they could have made the play-in tournament last season. And now you add in De'Aaron Fox into the mix, giving Wemby a legitimate all-star running mate. Fox didn't look entirely comfortable in their system after the mid-season trade, and he's already out to start this year with a hamstring issue. But I believe he could be a great long-term fit. The two of them could be devastating if they both get healthy at the same time and have a chance to build some real chemistry. Then there's Dylan Harper, the second overall pick, who's looked fantastic in the preseason so far. His college comps were to Jalen Brunson and James Harden, which make a lot of sense when you watch him play because of his great footwork and pacing. If he can contribute right away, I think that's a couple of extra wins right there. The supporting cast around Wemby is also pretty solid. They've got guys like Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, and Devin Vassell, plus useful rotation bigs with Luke Cornett and Kelly Olynyk, two guys that are going to help out the Spurs more than people realize as well. And then, the player people are sleeping on the most might be last season's Rookie of the Year winner, Stephon Castle. He finished out last season really strong after Wemby's injury, averaging nearly 5 more points per game, adding extra assists and rebounds while shooting more efficiently across the board over the final 30 games. The concern though, and it is a big one for the team, is the three-point shooting. That applies to Fox, Harper, and Castle, because none of those guys are consistent threats from deep, and that could cause some real spacing issues. If teams decide to double Wemby relentlessly and force the Spurs to have to make them pay from outside, I think the offense could really bog down. So, if you are going to be taking the over on the Spurs, that's really a Wemby bet. You're banking on him to be so dominant that he just elevates everybody else around him, no matter the offensive flaws. And while I am really high on San Antonio's future, I think they're going to barely fall short of that number this year, probably finishing around 43 wins. Now, let's move on to the Denver Nuggets, whose win total is set at 44 wins. And oh my goodness, I'm taking the over in a heartbeat. This is the deepest Nuggets roster we've seen since the championship run back in 2023. And honestly, this team is probably deeper than even that. Coach Adelman has already said he plans to run a 10-man rotation rotation to start the season, easing the workload on the starting five, which has always been an issue for Denver in past years. Nikola Jokic is still the best player in the league, and now that Denver has addressed two of their biggest issues, depth and defense, I think they're just going to be flat out better this season. And last year, they still managed to win 50 games, despite not fully locking in until the playoffs. Defensively, they have taken a clear step forward as well, leaning into more zone-based coverages, keeping Jokic from getting attacked as much in open space. And with Aaron Gordon and Christian Brown leading the charge, the team has set a clear internal goal to become a top 10 defense this season. And even though I might not be fully buying into that, probably seeing them finishing around 12th to 13th as a defense, you still love to hear that kind of confidence from the team. Then you've got Jamal Murray, who might be their biggest swing factor of all. Historically, he has coasted through the regular season, always saving his best for the playoffs. But everything coming out of camp and preseason suggests that this year is going to be different. He's in the best shape of his career now, dominating both ends in training camp, and in their last preseason game against Chicago, he had 30 points and looked completely locked in. On top of that, Bruce Brown is back, which is huge. And they've also added Big Val, Tim Hardaway Jr. and Cam Johnson into the mix. And speaking of Cam Johnson, I just love the pickup. He's basically a more polished and versatile version of Michael Porter Jr., who was sent to Brooklyn in that deal. Cam can handle the ball, make the extra pass, finish better around the rim, cut harder off ball, and he's simply more reliable as a defender. Those are all major upgrades that gives Denver more flexibility on both ends. So you've got the best player in the world, surrounded by arguably the best supporting cast that he's ever had. That's a recipe for an elite basketball team. And I just think that Denver are far too good to fall short of 54 wins. Now let's move on to the New Orleans Pelicans, whose over-under sits at 31 wins. This is one of those teams that almost has to try and win games, because they don't own their own first-round pick. Even if they were bad, they would gain absolutely nothing from it. That pick goes to Atlanta, so the Pelicans are going to have to try and win. And even though they have had some injury concerns in the past, I just feel like 31 wins is too low, and I see them somewhere more like 35 wins. Maybe even closer to 40 if they can stay relatively healthy. The hype around Zion getting into the best shape of his career definitely pulled me in a bit. If he can stay healthy, maybe out there for 60 plus games this season, I think that alone can lift their ceiling dramatically. When he is healthy, he's a top 20 player in the league, and it changes everything for their offense. Around him, you've actually got some good talented guys this season. Jordan Poole brings the scoring punch and was a lot better than people realized last season. Sadiq Bey's back from injury, Kevon Looney adds steady veteran leadership, and Trey Murphy feels like he could be ready for another breakout year. So while I don't see them climbing into that top half of the West, I think they're going to fight hard all season because they virtually have to. And that competitiveness alone could push them past 31 wins, and I think it will. So yeah, I am going to go over on the Pelicans. Now let's move on to the Houston Rockets, whose over-under is set at 54 wins, which is a lot, especially considering the Fred VanVleet injury update. That's ruled him out for the entire season. The Rockets made a big splash this offseason, landing Kevin Durant, and he feels their biggest weakness from last season: half-court scoring. Houston's offense often broke down late in games when the pace slowed, but now they have arguably the best pure scorer in the history of the NBA, a guy who can absolutely solve that problem. Then there's Amen Thompson, who I'm higher on than basically anybody else in the league. He's built like a mini Giannis, a freak athlete who plays with relentless energy and is able to impact both sides of the floor. I think he just raises Houston's floor with just how hard he's going to play every night and how good he already is defensively. Alperen Şengün also looks set for a breakout year. He was phenomenal at Eurobasket for Turkey, poised, efficient, and dominant. And if he continues that trajectory into the NBA, he could finally fulfill his nickname as Baby Jokic, getting better as a passer and improving with his efficiency as a scorer. As if Alperen Şengün can become the focal point of the Rockets' offense now that Van Fleet is gone, that could keep them right in contention. Defensively, the Rockets are going to be elite again. They were already one of the best on that side of the floor last season, while also being the best rebounding team in the league. And they've completely doubled down on that identity, while also adding Kevin Durant to help fix the offense. But as great as all of that sounds, the issue is that without Van Fleet, they lose their steady hand at point guard. The guy who kept everybody organized, knocked down open threes, and settled the young guys when things got chaotic. Without him, I think their ceiling does drop a bit. Unless Amen Thompson can step into that point guard role and be really good at it right away, I think Houston's going to struggle to find true offensive consistency. So while the Rockets might be one of the most toughest and physical defenses next season, I just don't see them hitting 54 games without Fred VanVleet. So I've got them more realistically in the high 40s. Now let's look at the Sacramento Kings, whose over-under sits at 35 wins. And honestly, if anybody can tell me what on earth they're doing, you're a genius. At the time of recording this, they just landed Russell Westbrook, which, if we're being totally honest, doesn't move the needle at all, and it might actually lower it. At this stage of his career, Westbrook just isn't a difference maker, and the roster just feels so weird. It's a collection of veteran guys who were all once really good players, but none of them were ever good enough to be a true number one. You've got DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Domantas Sabonis, recreating the 2023 Bulls, but in the West version. And while all of them can put up numbers, it just isn't a group that naturally fits together or gives you a clear direction. The way they handled the De'Aaron Fox trade too was an absolute disaster. And when you pair that with the firing of Mike Brown, they literally let their coach and best player go all in one season and replaced it with a future that really isn't there. That being said, as bleak as the outlook looks, I do think they're going to squeak past 35 wins. Barely. There is just too much talent on the roster to completely bottom out. And for that reason, I'm taking the over. Probably around 36 to 37 wins for the Kings this season. Now let's look at the Los Angeles Clippers, whose over-under win total is set at 48 games. A lot of people don't seem to be very high on this team coming into this year. And while the Clippers have this reputation of always finding themselves around 50 wins, I don't think that's actually a sure thing this season. The biggest concern for me is age and durability. This roster is loaded with veterans, and just about every major contributor has a long injury history. If even 2 or 3 of these guys miss some time, things could fall apart immediately. And while they are deep, depth can only cover for so much. Let's start with Kawhi Leonard. He's simply not someone who you can count on to play more than 50 games in a season at this point. The fact that he's actually healthy to start this season actually makes me more nervous, because now he has to get through a full 82 game grind and stay healthy for the playoffs. And as weird as that sounds, I'd almost rather for him to be hurt coming into a year, coming back around February, which would give him just enough time to get back into shape, but not enough time for him to get hurt again. So now that the Clippers have to manage his workload all season long, I think it could make it hard for the Clippers to build any real rhythm. The good news is, they did make a few moves. Bradley Beal coming over from Phoenix was one that I actually enjoyed. I also think Brook Lopez is going to be fine as an off-the-bench backup big, and then you've also got John Collins, who is another really underrated pickup. Of course, James Harden is still one of the best regular season floor raisers in basket. Say what you will about his playoff track record. In the regular season, he's elite at keeping a team steady, generating efficient offense, and shouldering the workload even when the stars are sitting. That's the main reason that I was tempted to go over, and it was so hard to come to a decision, because Harden alone can carry you to wins when others are resting or recovering. But again, all of this comes back to health. And even though I think the Clippers will be competitive when everybody's available, I'm going to be taking the under on 48 wins for them this season. Not by a huge margin, probably just a couple of games, but I just cannot get past the health and age concerns with this roster. Now, let's take a look at the Phoenix Suns, whose over-under win total is at 32 games. This team just does not make sense. Like, at all. You've got Jalen Green lining up to Devin Booker, which sounds like the ultimate my turn, your turn backcourt. There's almost no structure or balance between the two, and when you look at the rest of the roster, there's just nothing to be confident about. It's a strange mix of guys who don't fit long term and won't move the needle right now either. Now, the one guy that I actually do like is rookie big man Kaman Maliwatch. He absolutely dominated in the preseason game against the Lakers, putting up 17 points, 8 rebounds, 3 steals, and 2 blocks, while even knocking down a 3. He looks like the real deal already, fluid, confident, and impactful on both ends. But outside of him, it's hard to find anything else to be excited about with this team. Booker is still one of the best pure scorers in the league, but he's just not going to be able to get this team very far, because they are just not very talented. So, even though 32 wins does sound low, I still think that's too high. Personally, I'm really low on the Suns coming into this season. But there are 6 key things that you really do need to know about this season, unlike the Suns. And if you want to see the full breakdown, you can check out the full video right here.